Welcome back. Today we're going to do a quick class on the KZ ZS10 Pro 2, which came out a little while ago, and the newer KZ ZS12 Pro X. So they're very, very similar. Even if you look at the design of the two, they are very, very similar. This one just has a 1+4. This is a 1+5. So there is an extra balanced armature in the ZS12, and we'll talk about that in a second. But for those of you who don't have the ZS10 Pro 2, this is what this one looks like. And this was not the first one that used the super linear dynamic driver, but one of the earlier ones. So 4 switches, super linear dynamic driver, 4 balanced armatures, which are actually in these corners right here and then right here. So there's a kind of a 2 and 2. So when we look at ZS12, this is an all metal build. It is a flat black build, flat black paint or coating, all metal on the top and the bottom. It is super solid. It's a little bit weighty. If you kind of click these are very solid. These are very solid shells. KZ has done a couple all metal builds. This one is maybe the weightiest one that I've actually felt. It's definitely not aluminum. It's definitely a weightier material. It definitely has a very nice coating on it. It feels super solid. It will be a little bit weighty, like I said, if you're used to very lightweight IMs. Pro 2 isn't the lightest of weights, but kind of definitely a lighter weight than this one. It definitely feels very solid in the hand. It definitely feels like metal. I think it actually looks great and it actually feels great. But again, if you are sensitive to weight, it will be a little bit weightier. So as I said, the difference between the two is there's one extra balanced armature. So here there is 2, and then there's 2 in this other corner. And what we can't see on the ZS12 is that there is a balanced armature in the nozzle as well. So where this one is empty space, this one does have the balanced armature kind of right here. And so for those of you who are sensitive to the width on nozzles, this one, I measured at about 6.12. This one measures at 6.12. I took some quick measurements between this shell and this shell. Like I swore this one was a little bit different, something different about it, but I think it's exactly the metal version of this shell. I think that all the measurements are the same, but the nozzle width is basically the same on the two. So that's sort of the physical part of it. I think you still get the same 2-pin or QDC, flat cable. I think all of those are basically the same. So what is new on ZS12? This is the all metal black shell. Like I said, it is very nice. You still get the switches, but again, weighty, very, very nice shell. 1 dynamic driver, 5 balanced armatures, 4 balanced armatures like Z10 Pro 2, like I said, and then there's 1 extra one in the nozzle like I was talking about. So is it better than ZS10 Pro 2, or is it worth the extra money? And last I checked, this one I think is an extra $10 US compared to this one. I'm not sure if this price is going to stay the same or change, but that's about what it was when I looked at it. And I'll say that the two are actually different. The tuning is actually a little bit different between the two. We'll kind of get into that. So out of the box, this one, the ZS12, the one with the extra balanced armature, it is a bit brighter. It is more detailed. It is a little bit more intense on your ears. There is better separation, sharper. In my opinion, this one is probably the better gaming set and definitely better for lower volume listeners. The ZS10 Pro 2, this one definitely had a more relaxed feel to it for a hybrid. It sounded more natural and much better for treble sensitive people or higher volume listeners. Again, this was a very, very nice hybrid that KZ put out a little while ago, and lots of people bought it. Lots of people liked it. I mean, it's a very affordable 1+4. I mean, there's nothing really wrong with it. The tuning is what it is. The tuning on this one is what it is, and the two are not exactly the same. So I wouldn't say one is better than the other one, but this one will definitely suit a different listener type than this one. So if I could have the perfect set, it would be the one that would split the difference between the two. There are some occasions where I thought the ZS10 Pro 2 was a little bit too relaxed. It just needed a little bit more sharpness to the treble. And then when you get to ZS12, like, yeah, that is more treble. It is sharper. It is more resolving. But it's a little bit too much sometimes. Especially if you listen to it at a little higher volume, it's a little bit too much. So the one that would kind of split the difference between the two would have been the one that would be perfect. So yeah, I think this one it is very resolving, and it sounds very analytical and sharp in that way that a hybrid should, but I think it lost a little bit of its volume scaling with that intensity. So the sound, and this one was definitely tuned by the KZ tuner who prefers to be slightly brighter sounds. Those sets like Murga, Vader High Res, Duo, Symphony, those all had a slightly bright preference to them, and this one is a little bit no different. The combination of a slightly brighter tuning and balanced armature in the nozzle will appeal to people who prefer sharp details, a more analytical sound. And so why is it good for gaming? For the same reason. All those sharp details. It has an adjustable bass shelf for those of you who like to hear your explosions have a fun sound to it. You can turn the bass up. For those of you who want the clarity of a serious game, you can actually turn it down and you get all the clarity and the bass gets out of the way. So I do think this one will make actually a pretty nice gaming set for those two reasons. You kind of get both sides of it. So let us look at what actually happened on the graph. And these are graphs from KZ. My graphs are too close together, whereas KZ's official graphs actually show you the difference between the two. And just looking at them kind of next to each other, they look very, very similar. And you can kind of say, well, this one has a couple extra peaks and maybe that's a little bit brighter, but that's not actually the difference. If you actually look at where this one starts and where this one ends, right, this slope through the treble, this probably drops almost 10 dB from about right here down to here. And that is the most of the difference. Why this one sounds a little bit brighter. This is about a 10 dB drop. This is only a 5 dB drop, essentially. So it goes from about 116 to about 111. So you're just carrying out more energy in the treble. It's not decreasing as much as the 10 does, and that's essentially going to make up most of the difference that you hear in ear. There's just more energy carried out later in the treble. This one has a little steeper slope to the treble, so it sounds a little bit more relaxing. A lot of that upper treble has decreased in energy, and it's not overly energetic, kind of in the way that 12 is. 10 is definitely a more relaxed version. But yeah, I mean, the quickest way to just get a peek at it is to look at the slope of that and where it ends up, where it starts and where it ends up. And this one pretty much starts and ends. And the difference is about 5 dB. And if you've ever EQ'd a set and increased the treble by 5 dB, you sort of know that that's actually a pretty significant number. And that will carry quite a bit of energy through your treble. And that's exactly what you hear on 12. So yeah, it's definitely a more treble focus. It will sound a little sharper, more analytical, more detailed, more dynamic. All those things that come with a little bit more treble presence, you'll get those on 12. Those of you who are sensitive to all those things, you're going to prefer 10 because it sounds a little bit more natural, a little bit more relaxed. You can get more volume out of it because this is decreasing, all of those things. So very, very similar sets on paper. Quite different in tuning when you look at them side by side and look at how much energy is actually going to be carried over through the treble. So the sound, again, like I just said, I think I talked about that one already. It's tuned by that guy and why it's good for gaming. The bass, pretty much the same bass curves, and you can't actually see that on the graph, but on my graph you can see these are going to be essentially the same bass curves. You're going to get a similar bass range with the switches. That actually didn't change. It's probably the same exact dynamic driver, and it's probably tuned very, very similar, but there's still the same amount of bass presence on 12 as you got on 10, and I think people like that. I think it's the same fast super linear dynamic driver that is used on both of them. The switches will get you more or less bass presence. Like I said, if you are a gamer, that is a huge bonus because you can get more bass for fun, less for clarity. And it works out for music as well, but still a very fun KZ bass sound. Even though the treble is a bit brighter on 12, it doesn't lose its bass presence, which I didn't expect. There are some sets where they just sound a little bit brighter and there's a less bass presence. That happens quite often. It doesn't happen on this one, and it's just kind of the way they slope the bass shelf and the way it comes through, the way the dynamic driver is kind of ported through into the nozzle. All those things sort of help you get more of a bass presence, even though the treble has increased. You didn't get a decrease in the treble as I was expecting. So, but if you do prefer a cleaner, more analytical sound, do go lower on the switches. The top end, I think this is probably set to all fours, right? So this is all fours is the max bass boost and the lowest treble reduction, which is probably like 1 dB. So it is quite bassy. It is kind of V-shaped in that way. And if you prefer less, then definitely address the switches. But, it's just a fun KZ style hybrid. So I don't have any problem with leaving the bass where it is and the mids. And that's exactly where you start to hear these two separate, where you hear the difference between is in the mids, and the two start to diverge in that way. ZS12 sounds sharper, more resolving, a little more dynamic, perhaps more as a hybrid expectation. Certainly what I was expecting in a hybrid on 12, 1 plus 5 is sort of more what you get in Z12. A little bit sharper, more separation, more dynamics, but this one was more cohesive, right? If you're really into the dynamic driver sounding closer in tonality to the balanced armatures, that was definitely Pro 2. This is where they start to separate a bit. And for those of you who are really into hybrids for balanced armature sound, that's kind of where you get the ZS12. It definitely sounds more hybrid in that way. So these are your timbre people. These are your people who are really into cohesion and coherence. This is people who want to hear macrodynamics and microdynamics and details, resolution, analytics, all those things that sound sharper that come along with balanced armatures. You're going to get those on 12. This is the more relaxed version of that. So if you are a timbre priority person, ZS10 is probably going to be closer to your preferences. On the ZS10 Pro, the treble was really a complement to the mids. And again, like I said, that it was actually quite, it was cohesive in that way, whereas the dynamic driver all the way through the balanced armature sounded kind of nicely put together. On ZS12, it's more like a V-shaped sound. There's a heavy bass presence and then a heavier treble presence, and those two aren't exactly as smoothly combined or as transitioned as they should be. The treble will definitely creep up in level, and it gives you that sharper, more intense sound, and you lose a little bit of that cohesion, but then you get that sharper, more detailed, more resolving sound. And that's sort of the trade-off between those two, or the trade-off between these two. So the treble, and really that is the most notable difference between the two. The levels are different. Like I said, there's about a 5 dB at the end difference between the two, and that'll range, from about 2K to all the way out to 15K. It will ramp down in different ways. So you do get more energy carried out longer on ZS12. ZS10 Pro 2, it will definitely sound more relaxed and will handle volume without much of a problem. ZS12, definitely more of a treble presence, and volume will be your friend for finding the perfect balance point at which you're getting a resolving sound, but not overly intense. And that's the bit that I think was lost on ZS12, was those of you who like a lot of volume, ZS12 is going to be too intense. And part of it is the balanced armature in the nozzle. Part of it is just the increased level on the treble. So you'll turn the volume down, and you'll actually hear the really nice balance point between the bass curve and the mids and the treble. But if you push it a little bit too far, it starts to get a little bit too bright, too intense, too saturated, too much upper range. And at that point, you sort of have to back down and get it back into balance. But not unique to ZS12. Lots of brighter sets, lots of neutral bright sets kind of all follow the same pattern. They're going to be a little bit volume limited because of the level of treble, and ZS12 is no different in that respect. So timbre is a bit different too. The ZS10 Pro 2 is a little bit more relaxed. It'll really lessen the BA timbre, and it keeps vocals from sounding too thin. ZS12 is for people who really want to hear those details, more resolve, more treble into than bass, or more treble than bass. And if you were looking to hear treble extension at lower volumes, that is going to be your ZS12. It's very much a resolving set at lower volume all the way into the upper treble because of the way they carried out all the energy out there. So stage, and pretty much as you would expect on ZS12, plenty of treble level will create a larger space. If you hear the stage flatten with treble intensity, if it sounds overly saturated, lower the volume. Like I said, this is where it starts to get, too cluttered, too much high end. A lot of that at higher volume, the stage will start to flatten out on you. So back down on your volume. ZS10 and ZS10 Pro 2, more separation with the ZS12, but at higher volume, it can be all treble and lose imaging and balance and sound saturated, like all those things I just talked about. So Yeah, if the stage breaks down on 12, just back down on volume and you'll kind of get back to where it should be. Whereas this guy didn't really have any problem presenting a really nice stage at higher volume. So there you go. That is the ZS12 Pro X. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.